Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
Events are moving in the USA, as elsewhere, at a frantic pace. Obama increasingly taking on the appearance of a lame duck, looking as redundant to events as a Stonehenge pillar. A memory of what once was, or rather, could have been.
The go-to person in America is now Hillary Rodham Clinton, shaping up for a dynastic rematch with Jeb Bush, brother of the genius George W., son of the sinister George H.W.
Our good friend Stacey Herbert has been dodging the bullets fired by the increasingly militarized police over there. And I'm glad to say she's back in one piece over here to tour the North American horizon with us on the Sputnik. Stacey, welcome back from your quite long American sojourn. You must have absorbed the news agenda over there. Tell us what struck you most about that news agenda.
Well, the biggest story while we were there was the Ferguson, Missouri story, where a white police officer shot dead a teenager for jaywalking, which many Europeans might not know what jaywalking is. It's considered if you walk across the street from one sidewalk to the other.
Okay.
And he was stopped and apparently gave some lip back to the police officer, and he shot him dead. But the thing that was remarkable about it is, yes, there is a race issue across the United States always, but this unified people in terms of the shock at the military-looking response.
Yeah, they were done up like special forces.
Yeah, well, exactly. And they had military vehicles. They had snipers.
As if
for a war, yeah.
Yes, and that was brought up by many people, many reporters that had been in war zones over in Iraq and Afghanistan were shocked to see this. Now, many Americans were not aware. Since 2005, the Department of Homeland Security has given $4.5 billion in grants for local governments, state governments, city governments across the United States to purchase former military equipment from the Pentagon. It's a program called 1033. They've bought 12,000 bayonets.
Bayonets? Policemen with bayonets.
Wait, I thought that was, the last time I ever heard of that was like the U.S. Civil War. But they also bought MRAPs, which are these mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles, i.e. to protect from IEDs. Brevard County in Florida, which is home only to 500,000 people, they've bought 8 Apache helicopters, the Boeing AD-64Ds. So those are attack helicopters. 8.
So Boris Johnson's water cannon looks like a minuscule.
A pea shooter
Exactly.
compared to that.
Well, exactly. But it's an issue. People, it was shocking to see. People across the political spectrum were shocked to see this.
So it wasn't just a question in Missouri then. I had put it down to overzealous police chiefs in Missouri, but it seems like it's a national issue.
In the specific location of Ferguson, Missouri, there was the race issue. But it's
a black place, yeah, Ferguson?
Yeah, 67% of the population is African American. The police force there is entirely white. So you can't deny that that was an issue there. However, you were talking about the political race for president in 2016. I think you're going to see more of this civil liberties is going to be on the table in that election. And you saw the 2 front runners. I know you said Bush in there, but I think that's not going to happen. Jeb Bush has formed a private equity firm investing in oil and natural gas, as many seem to be doing these days. But on the national stage, I think the 2 main contenders are going to be Hillary Clinton and Rand Paul. Those are the 2 that also issued powerful statements about Ferguson, Missouri, actually, and they both mentioned race. Rand Paul said that anybody who denies that this is a race issue is, deluding themselves. Yeah. And he said, but the more important issue for everybody across America is the civil liberties. Here we are militarily occupied. It looks like a military occupation. And, police forces are supposed to protect the population from criminals, not occupy them.
Now, this dominated the news. I'm thinking, therefore, that Britain didn't occupy much news in the United States. You were making the point that in America, you could forget the rest of the world exists.
You really can. I mean, the outside world does not exist other than some, they do focus on terrorist stories, but, you don't even know, they don't even really focus on where it is in the world. It's the Middle East. Whether it's Libya, Syria, or Iraq, they just say the Middle East over there. But they never talk about Europe. Europe does not factor in, especially the UK does not factor in. Nobody, you never, I forgot you existed here.
But despite the special relation.
Yeah.
Well, it's a special relationship, which is one way. It's the kind of special relationship Miss Lewinsky had with President Clinton, which brings me to, I take your point about Jeb Bush. Not so sure that Jeb will not run, and if he runs, I'm sure that he'll win the nomination, I mean, not necessarily the presidency. But let's focus on Hillary for a minute. Bill Clinton back in the White House, albeit this time unlicensed to play with the interns. Hillary very much wearing the trousers. She must be a strong front runner.
Yes, even on Fox News, they're saying Hillary is going to be next president. She's in Iowa this coming week. And of course, that's where she famously lost to Barack Obama in the primaries. Nobody had heard of him before then. She's there this week at the Harkin Steak Fry, which is the event for,
as you do,
for the Democrat. She's with President Clinton. His favorability ratings are very good, so people love him in America, and they remember that was the last good times we had in America when the economy was still strong, before the housing bubble collapsed, before the stock market bubbles, the NASDAQ and the Dow Jones collapse. So I think he's more of a positive this time, and he learned from the mistakes he made during the last season on the on the stump for
So
Hillary.
if Bill's not a problem, and if being a woman, therefore, would seem to be her last hurdle, if you like, is America, having had now a black president, ready for a woman president?
Yeah, I mean, 2008, remember the big issue for the Republican Party at that time was the issue of gay marriage and things like that. That's over. It's been decided. The Republican political apparatus doesn't even want to talk about it anymore. They know it's a vote loser on the national stage. It might in local areas, but it's the Supreme Court has said, that you can't do this. You also have the legalization of marijuana going on all across the U.S.
I saw that.
So that's a huge shock to me. So
gunning down black people in Missouri, but at the same time legalizing marijuana across the states.
Yeah, exactly. But, I think that Rand Paul, this is why I think he could actually be a contender against Hillary Clinton.
Well, let's talk about him. He's the son of, now a senator, the son of his father, who also ran for president last time.
Ron Paul. Yeah.
Ron Paul was running as a libertarian, right-wing, but with some left-wing positions vis-a-vis the war and so on. How different are Rand Paul and Ron Paul?
Well, remember, Ron Paul won a lot of the primary votes based on the millennial young people voting. I think the important thing at this juncture, remember, just this week, as we begin the new school year in America, less than 50% of the students are white. So we're becoming a different nation. That old Republican, white, evangelical vote,
Protestant.
That's a losing bet for the future. Rand Paul comes from Kentucky. He's a senator for Kentucky. It's, part of the South and part of the deep South of, racism. He spoke out very well in Time magazine. He wrote a piece about that not only do we need to stop this militarization and foreign wars, but we have a problem with racism. Just like Nixon took us, opened the relationship with China, I think it's going to need somebody like a Rand Paul, a Southerner, a Republican, an evangelical sort that's going to come out and say, like, this, we need to move on beyond this. This is a post-racial sort of society for real.
Big money would be behind Bush against him. because the military-industrial complex can't like Rand Paul because he doesn't want to fight wars around the world. Jeb Bush has the magic name. What makes you so sure that he's not going to throw his hat in the ring?
I think Bush, he's just set up a private equity firm. He's told everybody that he's not running. When you're in the United States, nobody, the Fox News, none of the news channels were covering Bush. He's not even considered at this point. It was all about Rand Paul. That's the name. You have, some of the other people like Paul Ryan. He was, remember, a vice presidential candidate last time. But well, again, he's more on that, religious issues guy, Paul Ryan. And I think it's beyond that now.
Yeah. So the culture wars are over in that sense.
Well, the culture wars will never be over. There's always those issues. But I think the culture wars that the Republicans were fighting in a different, millennials are different. The browning of the population is no longer controlled by the white people as much. So I think the different issues, people are more liberal, progressive.
So Stacey, I saw the Butler recently, which together with 12 Years a Slave, the topic of which seems to reflect what you're saying is happening in the US, the whole revival of the dark past of the US, vis-a-vis its relation vis-a-vis the black Americans.
An outbreak of guilt about the past.
I think it has to come to terms with it, and then we're at that point in Ferguson, Missouri, kind of showed it that there are scars that you have to admit to and move past it. But again, I think it's this Rand Paul is obviously the Deep South is part of where that resentment has come from because of the whole unresolved issues from the Civil War, speaking of the bayonets, that if he could, I think he could actually bring some black vote into, because there were a lot of black voters for Ron Paul as well.
There were. Stacey, we've toured the horizon. We could go on doing so, but unfortunately, we're out of time. Welcome back, and thanks very much.
I think it's Hillary Clinton and Rand Paul. That's my bet.
Yeah, well, if that's your bet, it's also mine. Coming up after the break, a Daily Telegraph grandee, former Moscow-based journalist Liam Halligan, now on the home beat on the sensational defection of a leading Tory MP to the UK Independence Party. Don't go away. Welcome back to Sputnik. Although something of a figure around Parliament, Douglas Carswell was not a household name in many houses other than his own.
He is now, by the simple and honourable step of crossing the floor and resigning from Parliament, all in the one manoeuvre. Douglas Carswell is now poised to win the most sensational by-election victory since, well, my husband in Bradford West.
Nobody summed up the torpedoes heading towards the government's hull like the Telegraph's star columnist Liam Halligan, and he did so in the Tories' own house journal, the Sunday Telegraph, which is why we're glad he's on board the Sputnik today. Liam,
nice to see you.
Tell us first, what kind of man is Carswell?
Well, I'm not a UKIP supporter. I want us to have a very thorough negotiation with Brussels, and then I'll decide on the basis of that negotiation if I want us to stay in or leave the EU. UKIP, of course, wants to leave the EU regardless. Having said that, I applaud Douglas Carswell, and as I said in the Sunday Telegraph, I hope he wins in Clacton. Douglas isn't a personal friend of mine. I've met him on several occasions. I've read a lot of his prodigious written output. And then, throughout those meetings and in his writings, he struck me as an honourable, extremely thoughtful man. He doesn't only do his own research and come to his own conclusions, even more importantly, he's prepared to articulate those conclusions in public, regardless of who is offended. He could easily be a minister now. He could easily be heading for the cabinet. He's in his early 40s. He's a very good media performer, and he's extremely intelligent, and he's one of the few Tory types, if you will, who has a common touch with his constituents. I think he will win in Clacton. I think that's pretty clear.
Well, let's come to that, because on the face of it, it's a rock-solid Tory seat. The Tory MP has, in Churchillian terms, ratted and crossed the floor, you would think that the Tories could hold that seat. But the polls show a record 44% UKIP lead.
Absolutely. It is, of course, on paper at the moment a rock-solid Tory seat, but that's because Douglas Carswell has nursed it. Clacton, of course, albeit favourable to the Tories' boundary change, was a Labour seat. You have a lot of people in Clacton still who are dependent on benefits and would be seen as natural Labour voters. What's interesting, though, is that many of those are on board with Carswell. Now he's moved to UKIP. So the question is, if he can hold a lot of his Tory, natural Tory vote and attract some of the Labour vote that previously would have voted against him by default because he was and is psychologically, if you like, a Tory. But when David Cameron responds to Douglas Carswell's move by saying this is very bizarre, very odd, very strange, he looks completely out of touch. Not necessarily because Carswell has joined UKIP, but beyond that, in many ways, Carswell isn't a UKIP man. He's extremely liberal in Tory terms on immigration.
Yeah. He's far more sophisticated than your normal UKIP
He is
man.
not a red in tooth and claw Tory. He's a Gladstonian liberal, as he often says himself. He's, for many years, since he's been in Parliament, been making overtures towards improvements in our public life compared to when he was a youngster, our attitude towards people with disabilities, to women's issues and so on. He's really right on. And I know he's got a lot of friends in Parliament on the Labour side who admire him for that.
Yeah.
So he isn't a knee-jerk Tory, he is his own man. And so he represents, in many ways, this kind of anti-politician's politician, but not a kind of rock-hurling anti-politician's politician, somebody who uses Parliament in an extremely sophisticated way. And then again, also, you've got to look at the whether or not his defection will lead to others. I mean, there are names that you and I could mention. It would be unfair to do so. A lot of people are on manoeuvres. It will be very, very interesting to see.
I was just going to ask you that. What does it all mean? Does it mean the Tory party is beginning a kind of historic cleavage, an organic division between the pro and anti-European forces?
Well, if they formally split, in my view, that will condemn the Tories to opposition for at least 2 or 3 electoral cycles. I think what it means, and you can see it already from what Number 10 is briefing, is that David Cameron will be pushed more and more towards what Douglas Carswell's previous colleagues on the Tory benches want. Of course, the likes of
There's a limit to how far they can go.
Sure, and it's a very, very subtle game, isn't it? There are many Tory backbenchers, of course, who are Eurosceptics, and of course they've had to be seen on the airwaves in recent days condemning Carswell, and it was an error, and he's misguided. I won't call him a traitor. We've known each other a long time, but I think he'll regret his decision. Of course, I have to say that in public, but they know that what he's done has catalysed Number 10, and now you have Cameron's minions briefing that, he may actually, the position was he will negotiate and then campaign to stay in, but now he's saying he'll negotiate, and if he doesn't like the outcome of the negotiation, he may even campaign to take us out. But of course, it's crazy. He's had to be forced to this position. Anyone who's done anything outside of politics in their life, any kind of business, who's lived in the real world, felt any kind of financial insecurity, which of course he hasn't, knows that you have to go into a negotiation prepared to walk away.
Yeah.
And he's finally got to a position where it looks as if now, almost, whether or not he'll say it on the record, he might save it up for Tory conference or for later, it looks as though he is now prepared to at least say he might walk away. Why didn't he say that earlier? And it would look so much more convincing if he hadn't had to have been dragged to this position, kicking and screaming by fear, frankly, because of what Douglas Carswell has done and what others may do in the light of his almost certain electoral success in Clacton.
You know this, even if you won't openly concede it. The history, all hitherto, is the history of class struggle. Now, the British ruling class...
Oh, we can talk about class if you want, George.
The capitalist class does not want to leave the European Union. It knows that it would be, if not beggared, then gravely harmed by leaving the European Union. So a Tory party cannot actually withdraw from the European Union.
You know, I'm not sure that's true. That, with all respect to you, and I know you also say what you believe based on your research and so on. I think back in the early 70s, in the run-up to the previous referendum we had, you know, I was
a no voter then.
I was a pea shooter then. I was 4 or 5 years old. I do remember, and have obviously subsequently studied, that big parts of the Labour Party were no. There was that kind of trade union the Bennites and quite right the way,
Mr. Foot also
right the way across the party to the sort of to the soft centre and even to some part of the soft right who wanted to be outside the European Union, and there was this sense that it was a rich man's club and so on. I would say now that yes, you have the sort of accountants and the lawyers and so on and the sort of business implementers who want us to be in the EU, because they benefit hugely from the sort of legal morass and the accounting morass that it generates. But, you know, the big wielders of capital, they won't say it openly because they don't want to be seen to rock the boat. They leave that to people like you and me who are prepared to put their head over the parapet. But I think increasingly the big wielders of capital are extremely concerned about creeping regulation, endless bureaucracy, and also about the anachronistic side of what the EU represents. You know, when my kids hit the job market, my eldest daughter's 14, Britain should be doing far more trade with the world outside of the EU than within the EU. We're so focused on the EU and what we should be doing, and I think this is a correct part of the UKIP message, though a lot of Tories say it as well, and even the Prime Ministers give lip service to it. We should be trying much more with the emerging markets, the markets that are growing, where people are getting wealthier, the markets we desperately need to trade with to secure the prosperity of our children and our grandchildren. You know, this country does, if you add up all the trade we do with the big four emerging markets, Brazil, Russia and India and China, is less than the trade we do with Belgium, which for a trading nation with the English language and all the historic ties we have is ridiculous.
Yeah, does that reflect in the economy?
I think it does. I don't think we have an enormous balance of payments deficit, which is ridiculous given our place in the world culturally and economically, whereas the Germans are completely outclassing us on this front. The German economy, for all the difficulties it has, is far more future-proofed in terms of the markets it's won in the fast-growing countries, the emerging giants of the East.
They make better things than us.
They do make better things. They do make better things than us.
Well, maybe that's part of the problem. We've talked about what all this means for David Cameron. What does it mean for Nigel Farage? Will he be overshadowed slightly by a Carswell victory in whenever this by-election is?
That's a real politician's question, isn't it? That's 4 or 5 moves ahead in on the chessboard.
I'm always thinking.
Well, I think Nigel Farage has to take a lot of credit for what's happened. The political earthquake that is UKIP, the incredible success in the local elections. And as I say, I'm not a UKIP supporter, but the fact that he's got people of the calibre and credibility of Douglas Carswell joining the party, available to be in whatever kind of shadow cabinet they put together, Douglas will surely attract others, both from within and outside Parliament, to join UKIP.
Well, just remember you heard it here first. The deadly upas tree is deadly because nothing can grow in its shade. And Nigel Farage is a deadly upas tree. So we'll see how he gets on with these new stars coming onto the chessboard. Liam Halligan, The Telegraph's lucky to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, on the prospect of Hillary becoming the next American president, the people responded quite horrified. Liberty says, I hope not, but it'll be business as usual, whomever gets in. In regards to the Tory defector, Charles McGrath says, a storm in a teacup, or a sign of change. Some backbench stories may follow and give UKIP foothold before 2015. And I can't help but mention our beloved William Hague again, who answers, that peasant thought he'd start a revolt, yet backbenchers merely saw his deflection as revolting. And that's it for this week.
Which sadly means that's the end of the show.
Do please keep in touch with us on Twitter at RT_Sputnik, and on Facebook you can like us on Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.